I knew something was wrong the moment my daughter-in-law placed the cold plate in front of me. The others were slicing into thick pink steaks that still sizzled on their plates, while mine held a piece of meat curled at the edges, gray and stiff as if it had been rescued from the back of a fridge. No one looked at me, not even long enough to pretend. I sat there at the far end of the table, as if I were a distant relative who had arrived without warning, not the woman who'd once rocked half the people in that room to sleep. I cut into the tough meat, slowly letting the chatter drift over me. Andrew laughed too loudly at something Claire said, that hollow laugh he's developed since climbing the corporate ladder. He used to laugh with his whole chest when he was a boy, throwing his head back, making me laugh too, no matter how tired I was. Now he laughed like someone worried about being overheard. "I hope the seasoning isn't too strong for you," Helen Claire said without turning her head. Her hair was perfect as always, each strand obedient. She never asked how I was, only whether something might inconvenience her. "The seasoning is fine," I answered. The meat was ice cold, but it didn't matter. I'd learned a long time ago that telling the truth to people who don't care is just another way of wasting breath. Around me, forks clinked. Voices rose, glasses chimed. I sat in the draft from the kitchen door. They had pushed an extra chair there at the last minute. No table setting, no napkin folded like the others, just a chair dragged from the hallway. As if someone remembered me only when the doorbell rang. They had planned everything so carefully. The wine, the menu, the seating, and somehow I was the only part that didn't fit. It wasn't the first time, of course, but something about tonight pressed differently on my chest. Maybe it was my age. 72 feels like a strange threshold. Old enough to be invisible, but not old enough to stop noticing it. Maybe it was the way Andrew avoided meeting my eyes, as though I carried a question he wasn't prepared to answer. I chewed the dry piece of meat, letting the silence form around me like a second skin. They talked about a new vacation home in Vermont, about renovations, about upgrades to the children's school programs. I knew without needing to ask whose money had helped make each of those things possible. Money has a way of leaving fingerprints even when you give it quietly. At one point, my grandson, little Michael, glanced at me. A soft, flickering look like a light bulb, unsure whether to stay lit. He gave me a tiny smile before his mother tapped his arm and directed his attention back to the conversation. Even children learn where affection is permitted. I finished my plate first. Cold food is easy to swallow when you don't taste much. No one noticed. They were too busy passing the wine that wasn't offered to me. Too busy praising Claire's perfectly cooked steaks, though I'd seen the chef deliver them from a catering bag half an hour before. Appearances matter more than truth in that house. When dessert came, something glossy and expensive, I wasn't served until the very end, a sliver thin enough to be symbolic. I didn't protest. I'd spent too many years mistaking patience for strength. By the time Andrew walked me to the door, he was already checking something on his phone. Work probably, or messages from people whose names I don't know, but who seem to own pieces of his attention. I never will again. "Drive safe, Mom," he said, not looking up. "I always do," I replied. My voice sounded even to my own ears, quiet, steady, as if the evening hadn't scraped something raw inside me. The cold air outside felt kinder than the warmth of their dining room. My old sedan waited at the curb, patient and unpolished. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment before starting the engine, watching the lit windows of their house blink like indifferent eyes. When I finally drove away, I felt a thin crack form inside. Not the dramatic kind that shatters, but the quiet, decisive kind that signals the beginning of something irreversible. The road home was dark and empty. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel guilty for wanting to be alone with my thoughts. When I got home that night, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the dark rooms by memory, feeling the quiet settle into my bones, like an old companion. The house isn't big, but it holds the history of a life lived with care. Photographs on the mantel, worn armrests on the sofa, the faint scent of cedar from the closet my husband built decades ago. Nothing in this place has ever asked me to be less than I am. That's more than I can say for my own family. I sat at the kitchen table and let my hands rest on the wood. They've worked all my life typing numbers, carrying laundry, holding my children's feverish heads, signing checks I shouldn't have been asked to sign. These hands raised a son, paid his debts, steadied his steps even when he stopped looking back at the woman who held him upright. It didn't happen all at once. Andrew was a sweet boy, then a proud teenager, then a man who seemed to believe success meant distancing himself from everything that reminded him of where he came from. His father's death only made it worse. Grief can break people open or harden them, and Andrew chose the second path. I didn't blame him. Not then. After the funeral, there were bills, hospital legal mortgage repairs, and I paid them quietly. I didn't want him drowning when I still had breath. He'd married Claire by then, and she talked about financial planning with that bright enthusiasm people get when they think money is something they'll always have. I listened. I nodded. I wrote the check she hinted at but never asked for outright. The first big one was for their house 20% down so they could get a better rate. They called it a loan, but no one ever mentioned repayment. I didn't bring it up. Then came new furniture because a growing family needs comfort. Then a nanny for the first child, then private school for the second, then car repairs, then orthodontics, then a vacation they swore they'd save for, but didn't. I covered what I could, and when I couldn't, I found a way. Every Christmas, I told myself the same thing. It's a blessing to help your family. Every birthday, children don't owe their parents anything. Every time my account grew lighter, I'm old. What else do I need? It wasn't martyrdom. It was habit, a mother's instinct to soften her child's path, even if it means walking barefoot herself. But over time, the requests changed in tone. What used to be gratitude became expectation. What used to be a thank you became silence. I remember one afternoon when Andrew's voice sounded almost impatient as he told me the insurance bill wasn't paid yet, as if I were the one who'd forgotten. I paid it that evening without comment, though I felt something inside me shift. Not break, just shift. It wasn't the money itself. Money can be earned again, saved again. It was the way he handed responsibility to me, the way some people toss laundry into a basket, casual, thoughtless, certain it would be cleaned and folded by the time they needed it. He was my son, and somehow I had let him believe I was bottomless. There were smaller things too, the kind that people dismiss, but that settle into your memory like dust into old curtains. Claire correcting the clothes I wore, her subtle comments about my frugal tastes, the way she guided conversations away from anything that didn't center on her own world. They didn't mean harm. I know that people rarely mean harm, they simply forget to look beyond themselves. And I allowed myself to become the shadow in the corner of my own family. My grandson, Michael, was the exception. He always offered to carry groceries, asked about my day, listened to my stories the way Andrew once did. Children have a way of seeing through the noise. They haven't learned yet to pretend. I thought of him as I sat at the table that night, letting the refrigerator hum fill the silence. I wondered what kind of man he would become. I wondered whether he'd someday learn to look past the way life shapes people and see who they used to be. My eyes drifted to the folder on the counter, the one with bank statements I'd ignored for months. Automatic payments for their bills all tied to my account. I had set them up myself. A mother's comfort, I'd told the banker. A temporary arrangement, I'd said. Temporary can stretch a long time when no one questions it. But that night, after the cold leftovers and the empty seat at the far end of the table, I realized something quietly, deeply, without ceremony. I had built a world in which everyone relied on me and yet no one truly saw me. I had handed them an open door and then wondered why they kept walking through it. There's a difference between giving and disappearing. I had crossed that line without noticing. I stood up, slowly feeling the familiar ache in my knees. Perhaps tomorrow would be different. Perhaps not. But tonight, at least, I allowed myself to admit the truth. Love doesn't ask you to shrink, and I had been shrinking for far too long. I turned off the kitchen light finally and made my way to the bedroom, carrying thoughts that felt heavier than any bag of groceries I'd ever lifted. The night after that dinner was strangely quiet, as if the house itself were holding its breath with me. I couldn't sleep, though. My body begged for rest the way an old door begs for oil. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling. Patterns I've memorized over the years, and felt the weight of the evening press against me from the inside. It wasn't outrage. I'm too old for outrage. It was something slower, deeper, like the cooling of embers that still burn beneath the ash. Pain doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it prefers to whisper because whispers linger longer. Around midnight, I finally got up and put on my robe. The floor was cold under my feet, but that kind of cold has never bothered me. I walked to the living room, turning on only the small lamp near the window. A soft amber glow spilled over the photographs, arranged in their careful rows. There was Andrew at 6, covered in mud, and grinning proudly after his first attempt at gardening. There he was again at 12, holding up a science trophy, the sparkle of triumph in his eyes. And there, my husband Thomas, shoulders broad hand on Andrew's small back, smiling at me behind the camera. I stood there a long time, feeling the edges of memories brushing against me like gentle hands. "Where did we go wrong, Tom?" I whispered into the stillness. It wasn't a question for an answer, just a thought letting itself out after years of pacing in my mind. I made tea, though I knew caffeine wouldn't help me sleep. The steam rose in soft curls, drifting like the breath of something warm and patient. I held the cup between my hands, letting the heat soak into my palms. I used to make tea for Andrew when he came home sad or overwhelmed. He'd sit at this same table, fingers tapping nervously, while I waited for him to speak. He doesn't come to me with his troubles anymore. He only comes with his invoices. I took a slow sip and exhaled. I had spent so many years believing that giving was the same as loving, and loving was the same as being needed. But that isn't true, is it? Need can be a form of hunger that never looks up to see who's feeding it. And love doesn't grow in that kind of soil. I walked into the study where the filing cabinet stood. I hadn't opened it in months. The drawer slid out with a tired groan as if bracing itself for what might come next. Inside were folders arranged in familiar order. Utilities, insurance, taxes, investments, and then thickest of all, the folder labeled simply family. I pulled it out and carried it to the desk. For a moment, I hesitated. Old habits die reluctantly. Then I opened it. Bill statements, receipts, years of transactions stacked like sediment. Layer upon layer of quiet generosity, quiet expectation, quiet neglect. Here was the automatic payment for Andrew's second mortgage. Here was the insurance bill for Claire's car. Here was the tuition fee for Michael's school paid early because they were always in a pinch this month. My name, my signature, my account number repeated again and again like a refrain. I felt no anger looking at it, only clarity, a kind of clarity that comes late in life when you finally stop lying to yourself to make others comfortable. "This isn't love," I murmured. "This is dependence dressed as family." I closed the folder not harshly but with finality. The latch clicked, a small, decisive sound that echoed more loudly in my chest than in the room. I sat back in the chair, letting my shoulders relax. For the first time in years, the idea of saying no didn't fill me with guilt. It filled me with a strange, steady quiet a sense that maybe I was allowed to protect the small piece of myself that remained untouched. Maybe I wasn't meant to keep carrying them the way I have. Maybe caring for them now means stepping back, not stepping in. I touched the thin gold ring on my finger, Thomas's ring which I'd had resized to wear after he passed. He was a practical man not given to sentiment, but he always said one thing with certainty. Helen, don't let the people you love forget that you are a person too. I had forgotten that for a long time. The clock struck 2. I breathed in the quiet of the room, letting it settle inside me. Tomorrow, I knew, would not wait for me to be ready. Decisions rarely do. But I felt something taking shape within me, a firmness I hadn't used in decades, a steadiness that felt both foreign and familiar. I turned off the lamp, letting darkness return to the room. And as I walked back toward the bedroom, I realized that tonight had not been a night of pain. It had been a night of reckoning, of seeing clearly what had been hidden in plain sight for years. By the time I finally lay down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Morning would come, and with it the first step toward changing everything. By morning, the decision that had kept me awake through the night no longer felt frightening. It felt calm, as if I'd finally stepped into the shape of the woman I should have been all along. I rose before the sun the way I always do, and moved slowly through the house while the kettle warmed. My joints protested, but even that pain felt purposeful today, like the body reminding me that I had carried too much for too long. I dressed neatly, nothing fancy, just the slate gray coat. Thomas always said made me look capable, and took the folder labeled family from the desk. I didn't reread anything. I didn't need to. The numbers were etched into my memory the way disappointments etch themselves into the lining of the heart. The bank opened at 9, but I arrived a little past 8:30. Habit, I suppose. I've always preferred being early. It leaves less room for the world to surprise you. A light rain had started making the sidewalk shine like polished stone. I stood under the awning, breathing in the clean, wet air until the doors unlocked. Inside, the familiar scent of paper and carpet cleaner greeted me. I approached the reception desk, and the young man behind it smiled politely, his eyes flickering to my hands holding the folder. "Good morning. How can we help you today? I'd like to speak with Laura Jennings," I said. "If she's available," he typed something. Nodded. "She should be free in a few minutes. Would you like to take a seat?" I chose the chair near the window, the one with a view of the parking lot. It's strange how comforting ordinary things can be when you finally made up your mind. Laura soon appeared, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed perhaps, in her 40s. She'd helped me set up my investment accounts years ago. Back then, she used to call me Mrs. Grant. Now she called me Helen. I never corrected her. "Helen, good morning," she said, extending her hand. "Come with me. Let's see what we can do for you." We walked into her office, a tidy room with 2 framed certificates and a small plant she always forgot to water. I liked her for that. Flaws make people human. "What brings you in so early?" she asked once we sat down. I placed the folder on her desk. "I need to make some changes, significant ones." She opened it carefully, scanning the first few pages. I watched her expression shift from curiosity to something closer to concern. "These automatic payments, most of them are tied to other households." "Yes." "And I'd like to stop all of them," I said immediately. She didn't blink, but she didn't pretend to understand either. That's what I appreciated about her. She never assumed. "All right," she said quietly. "We can suspend them first and then remove them entirely once you sign the forms. Some accounts might notify the recipients before the next billing cycle. Is that acceptable?" "That's fine." She nodded and typed with swift precision. Her fingers moving across the keys sounded almost like rain tapping on glass. "And the shared credit cards?" she asked after a moment. "Frozen," I said. "All three." She gave a slow, understanding nod. "Of course. And the authorization on your account. Your son still has access as secondary signer." I felt something in my chest tighten, but not painfully, more like a stitch being pulled into place. "I want it revoked." This time she paused. "Helen, I'll do whatever you ask, but may I ask, do you feel safe? Is someone pressuring you financially?" I almost smiled. The world sees an elderly woman making a clear decision, and the world assumes she must be in danger. Perhaps that says more about the world than about me. "No, Laura. I'm not being coerced. I'm simply choosing to take my life back." She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I trust you." For the next 20 minutes, we worked through document after document. She explained each step thoroughly, though I already understood most of it. A lifetime in bookkeeping teaches you the fine print of things. Still, I let her speak. It's kind to let people do their jobs without interruption. When the stack of forms was finally ready, she handed me the pen. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. I thought of Andrew's face last night, eyes sliding past me as though I were furniture. I thought of Claire's polished smile, the way she placed the cold leftovers in front of me without flinching. I thought of the years of checks, written bills, paid emergencies, covered gratitude shrinking each year like fabric left too long in the sun. "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." My signature flowed easily without hesitation. The pen didn't tremble. My hand didn't waver. It felt almost like reclaiming something I didn't realize I'd lost. When the last page was signed, Laura gathered the papers and gave me a small, warm smile. "You've done something very brave today." I shook my head. Not brave, just necessary. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cool and fresh, the kind of morning that feels like it belongs to someone who hasn't yet used up all her chances. I walked to my car slowly, not out of frailty, but because, for the first time in a long time, I wanted to feel the rhythm of my own steps. By the time I turned the key in the ignition, I knew that whatever happened next would be loud. Panicked calls, confusion, accusations. But inside me, there was only quiet. A steady, deliberate quiet that felt almost like peace. I drove home without rushing, the world passing gently around me as if for once it wasn't asking me to hurry. The first call came sooner than I expected. I had barely set my coat on the hook when my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, skittering a little across the wood like it was startled too. At first I didn't answer, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I wanted to finish taking off my shoes. After 72 years of living, a woman earns the right to take her time. It was Claire's number, of course. I let it ring out. The voicemail icon blinked. Then another call came almost immediately. Andrew this time. I watched his name flash on the screen. The same name I once wrote on lunchbox labels, on birthday cards, on school forms. Names don't change, but people do. The call rang long enough to suggest panic or irritation. With Andrew, it's often hard to tell the difference. I poured myself a glass of water, then finally picked up the phone and turned it face down. Silence returned to the house like an old friend easing back into its chair. It didn't last. A message arrived, short-clipped. "Andrew. Mom, call me." Something's wrong with the card. Then another. "Andrew, did the bank freeze our joint account? They won't tell me anything." I read the words slowly, letting each one settle. Our joint account, as if I were a minor shareholder in my own life, as if the account existed because he had ever put a single dollar into it. I breathed out through my nose and set the phone aside. A kettle takes its time to boil, and so did the rest of the morning. I moved through the house the way you moved through a familiar memory, softly without rushing. But every few minutes the phone buzzed again, relentless as a dripping faucet. By noon, the tone had changed. Claire. Helen, this is serious. My card was declined at the pharmacy. Declined. Can you please explain what's happening? I could almost hear her voice tight offended, as though the universe had made an administrative error by inconveniencing her. I imagined her standing there in her expensive coat, unwilling to consider that someone other than a store clerk might be responsible for her discomfort. Next came Andrew again, and this time the message was longer. Andrew, Mom, this isn't funny. I tried 3 cards. They all got declined. The mortgage payment bounced this morning. The bank said they can't discuss it with me anymore. Did you change something? Please call me. The word please arrived like a guest who didn't know whether they were welcome. I sat down with my tea ginger, the kind that warms more than it burns, and watched the steam rise. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. I had expected anger or guilt or some sharper emotion to stir inside me, but all I felt was a slow, steady certainty. This is what consequences sound like. The next call wasn't from Andrew or Claire. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity tugged at me. Grandma. Michael's voice thin, worried. Too soft for the world he's growing into. Oh, sweetheart, I said, easing into my chair. Is everything all right? I'm not sure. He hesitated, and I could picture him rubbing the back of his neck the way he does when he's anxious. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Dad tried to pay for gas and the pump locked. He was yelling on the phone with the bank when I left for school. I closed my eyes briefly. I never liked the way Andrew raised his voice around his children, even in frustration. Thomas never had to shout. Some men mistake volume for authority. Are you okay? I asked him. Yeah, he said quickly. But Dad's mad. And Mom, well, she's being Mom. That made me smile, though there wasn't much humor in it. He cleared his throat softly. They said something happened with the accounts. Did you do something? I thought carefully before answering. Michael deserved truth, but not the kind that wounds. I made some changes, I said. Changes that were overdue. There was a pause. Not judgmental, not shocked, just thoughtful. Are you doing it because of last night? He asked. The honesty in his voice was so raw, so open, that I felt something tighten gently beneath my ribs. Partly, I said, but mostly because I've been doing too much for too long. He blew out a slow breath. Yeah, I figured then, quieter. You didn't look very happy. Children see everything even when they pretend not to. I didn't want him carrying guilt for something he didn't create, so I shifted the conversation. Don't worry about the adults, I said softly. They'll figure out how to stand on their own feet. That's something they should have learned a long time ago. He didn't laugh, but I heard the corner of a smile in his voice. Okay, Grandma. I just wanted to check on you. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. After we hung up, the house returned to quiet again. It wasn't heavy this time or lonely. It felt earned. But the peace lasted less than 10 minutes before the next call came. Andrew again, and this time the ring was sharp and insistent, like a fist pounding on the door. I didn't answer. Some lessons must be learned without a witness. By late afternoon, the ripples of my quiet morning had spread into something far louder on their end. I could feel it even from inside my still house. The tension, the confusion, the edges of panic sharpening with each declined transaction. People reveal themselves fastest when comfort is taken away. It's a truth I've witnessed through decades of bookkeeping and even longer years of motherhood. Around 3 hours, the messages stopped being questions and became accusations. Claire, Helen, this is unacceptable. I was at the dentist's office with Michael and the payment didn't go through. They made us wait 20 minutes while they checked the system. I was humiliated. What did you do? As if humiliation was something that happened to her, not something she had freely handed out to others. I turned my phone face down again and continued folding laundry. My own this time, not theirs. Soft towels, worn shirts, quiet tasks that hold their dignity. Then came another message from Andrew. "Andrew, Mom, you can't just cut us off like this without warning. We have responsibilities. The kids have needs. I need you to call me now." I paused on that line. I need you. It was the closest he'd come in years to acknowledging I was more than a voice that signed checks. I wondered if he heard himself or if the words slipped out by accident born of panic. Still, I didn't respond. Not because I was being cruel, but because answering now would only lead me back into the same cycle. The reassurance, the apology, the peacekeeping and peace bought with silence is the most expensive kind. Outside, the sky had turned gray, the clouds drifting low enough to brush the tops of the trees. I made myself another cup of tea and took it to the living room, lowering myself into the chair Thomas bought me on our 20th anniversary. A sturdy piece with a back that supported you without swallowing you whole. I remember he joked that it was a queen's throne for the queen of this house. I hadn't felt like a queen in a very long time. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of raised voices, muffled but unmistakable, coming from the sidewalk outside. Curious, I lifted the curtain just enough to see. Andrew stood by his car phone pressed to his ear, pacing back and forth as though movement might force the universe back into order. His shoulders were tight, jaw clenched. Even from a distance, I could tell the call wasn't going well. Claire sat inside the car, arms crossed, face twisted with the kind of indignation reserved for people who've lived too long without being told no. Every few seconds, she gestured sharply at Andrew, clearly telling him what to say or do. They hadn't knocked on my door yet. I noticed they were still trying to solve the problem the way they solved everything, with pressure, with insistence, with the belief that the world just needed a firm enough push to comply. I let the curtain fall back. A part of me, an old, tired part, remembered all the nights I stayed awake, worrying about Andrew when he was small. The fevers, the nightmares, the first heartbreak at 17. I would have done anything to ease his pain then. But this wasn't the pain of a child learning how to live. This was the discomfort of adults finally being asked to stand on their own legs. The phone buzzed again. "Claire, we're outside. Open the door." It wasn't a question. I didn't move. Minutes passed and soon there was knocking. Sharp, rapid, as if they believed urgency could dissolve the door. But I stayed in my chair, tea warming my palms. I could hear muffled conversation outside now, an argument between them, voices, rising words, indistinct but tone unmistakable. Then the front door rattled slightly, not from force but from Andrew trying the handle out of habit. It's always locked. He should know that by now. Helen. Claire's voice at last cutting through the hallway from the porch. "This is ridiculous. We need to talk about this." Her tone wasn't one of concern or remorse. It was command expectation. Authority borrowed from years of getting what she wanted. A long time ago, that tone would have made me open the door, offer tea, apologize for whatever she decided I had done wrong. Now I simply sat still. After a moment, their voices began to fade. First on the porch, then down the walkway, then the car door slammed. The engine revved sharp and irritated, and they drove off. Not far, I suspected just enough distance for them to shout at each other freely. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. In the quiet that followed, my phone lit with another message. This one from Michael. "Michael, Dad's really upset. Mom, too. Just checking that you're okay." Of all the messages that day, only his felt like it came from a place of gentleness. I wrote back a single line. "I'm all right, sweetheart, don't worry. Adults make noise when they're confused." He responded with a little heart. Simple, pure. the kind of thing that reminds a woman she didn't fail entirely at raising a family. As evening settled over the house, I sat by the window with my cooling tea and watched the street lamps flicker on one by one. Somewhere across town, my family was unraveling threads they had never bothered to understand. Threads I had held together for decades with quiet hands. They had eaten their steaks and left me with leftovers. Now they were tasting what it meant to live without the woman who had quietly financed their comfort. And though I felt no joy in their struggle, I felt something far steadier, far cleaner, the first breath of a space in my life that finally belonged only to me. By the next morning, the house felt strangely alive, as if the walls themselves had sensed the shift inside me. I made oatmeal the way I always did, slowly, without hurry, letting the steam rise into the dim kitchen light. My phone stayed on the counter, silent for once. Whether they were tired of calling or simply regrouping, I didn't know. Silence can mean so many things. I had just sat down with my breakfast when a light knock sounded at the door. Not urgent, not demanding. A soft, tentative rhythm, the kind a child might use on a sleeping parent's room. I opened the door to find Michael standing on the porch, hands buried in the pockets of his jacket, shoulders hunched against the cold morning air. "Grandma, can I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course, sweetheart." He walked in slowly, looking around as if checking that everything was still where he remembered it. Some children grow out of noticing the details of a house. Michael never had. "Did they send you?" I asked gently. "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "They don't know I'm here. Dad's at work and Mom's on the phone with the bank again." He sat at the table and watched me for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "They're saying someone messed with their accounts," he said. "Mom thinks it's a mistake. Dad thinks the bank is incompetent." He paused. "But I think they know it might be you." I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle into my chest before answering. "And how do you feel about that?" He shrugged, but it wasn't a careless gesture, more like a boy trying to carry an adult-sized truth. "I don't know. I mean, I guess I figured it wasn't going to go on forever. Dad and Mom rely on you a lot." There was a quiet honesty in his voice that made something soften inside me. He continued, "I always thought it was weird, like they act stressed about money, but we still go on vacations and buy all this stuff, and they never talk to you at dinner unless you ask them something first." I felt my throat tighten, but not with sadness, with recognition. Children see everything, even the things adults pretend are invisible. "I'm sorry they treat you that way," he said suddenly, eyes dropping to his hands. "Last night, it didn't feel right." I reached across the table and rested my hand over his. His fingers were warm, tense. "It wasn't your burden to carry," I told him softly. "None of this is." He looked up at me then with that earnest expression I've always loved, the one that makes him look so much like his grandfather. "Are you okay, Grandma, really?" "I am," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in a long while, he exhaled as if relieved. "Good, because I was worried you'd be sad or scared. I was sad, I admitted, for many years, and fear." I paused. "Fear loses its strength when you finally stop pretending everything is fine." Michael nodded slowly, as if absorbing each word. "I want you to know something," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm not trying to punish anyone. I just finally decided to stop disappearing." He swallowed, then nodded again. "I get it." And I believed he did. Maybe not fully, not yet. He was still so young, but enough to understand that love isn't measured by what you pay for. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while. He accepted a bowl of oatmeal without protest, even though I knew he preferred cereal drowned in sugar. He ate quietly, respectfully, the way children do when they instinctively sense a moment matters. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me longer than usual. "If you ever need anything," he said shilly, "you can call me. I mean it." His arms around me felt like an anchor, steady, warm, real. Not the kind of love that demands or assumes, the kind that simply stays. After he left, the house settled again into quiet. But it wasn't the old quiet, the quiet of being forgotten. It was a new kind, a gentle, grounded kind. The quiet of knowing at least one person in this world saw me clearly. And for a woman my age, that was more than enough for now. The morning after Michael's visit, I felt a steadiness inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, no, that was for younger women, but a quiet conviction, the kind that grows slowly like roots, finding deeper soil. I took my time getting dressed, choosing a simple navy blouse and the good slacks I kept for doctor visits and church. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see a fragile old woman. I saw someone returning to herself. The lawyer's office sat in an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaking floors and narrow hallways that smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. I'd been there more times than I cared to admit over the years, usually to sign documents that protected everyone but me. But today felt different. Today I wasn't shielding anyone. Today I was simply setting things right. "Mrs. Grant, the receptionist, called Mr. Nolan will see you now." Stanley Nolan had been my lawyer for almost 15 years. He'd aged in the way men sometimes do, softening at the edges, growing gentler with time. He rose when I entered, offering a warm handshake. "Helen," he said, "it's good to see you. What brings you in?" I sat down, placing my folder thinner now on his desk. "I need to revise my will," I said, "and establish a trust." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "All right. Do you want to talk about what prompted this?" "No," I said simply. "I just need to make sure my affairs reflect my intentions, and I intend," I added, "to protect what little I have left." Stanley nodded with the calm professionalism I'd come to rely on. "Let's start with the will." "Who are your current beneficiaries?" I told him. Then, more importantly, I told him what needed to change. When I said Michael's name, only his, no one else's. Stanley paused, pen hovering over the paper. "Just your grandson?" he asked. "Yes. He's the only one who's ever treated me like more than a wallet with a pulse." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Understood." We spent the next hour going through each asset carefully. The house, the savings, the investment accounts, the small pension that still trickled in from my years at the firm. Piece by piece, I moved everything into a trust, managed by me until I no longer could, and after that, by a professional trustee until Michael turned 25. And your son Stanley asked gently. "No provisions. He'll have to learn to live within his means," I replied. "I've spent too many years confusing love with rescue. I'm too old to keep saving a man who won't save himself." Stanley accepted that with a quiet nod. He'd seen these stories before, older women carrying entire families on their backs because no one else bothered to lift a hand, but he hadn't seen me step out from under that weight until today. When all the papers were drafted, he slid them toward me one by one. My signature looked firm, almost elegant, not like the cramped scrawl of a frightened woman. Each stroke of the pen felt like a piece of myself returning. "Do you feel good about this?" he asked softly when I finished. "Not good," I said, "but right. There's a difference." He smiled faintly. "There is." Outside, the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I walked slowly to my car, breathing deeply, letting the crisp air settle in my lungs. A small bird sparrow, I think, hopped along the curb, picking at something invisible. Even that tiny creature seemed freer than I'd felt in years. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear my thoughts clearly, to feel the magnitude of what I'd just done. For decades, my life had revolved around everyone else's emergencies, everyone else's needs. I had forgotten what it meant to make a decision purely for myself. Now I did. Back home, I placed the trust documents in the top drawer of my desk, the one Thomas used for important things. The wood creaked softly as it closed, almost like approval. For the rest of the evening, the phone stayed mercifully quiet. No messages, no demands, no frantic explanations, just the slow settling of a day that marked a boundary long overdue. And though I didn't celebrate, I allowed myself something better than celebration, the gentle, unfamiliar sensation of having chosen my own life. By the next morning, the storm had spread far beyond my quiet street. I could sense it before I even checked the phone. Some instinct sharpened by motherhood, the old ability to read trouble in the air, the way sailors read weather on the horizon. Trouble has a rhythm. Hurried footsteps clipped breaths, the tightness of urgency that leaked through walls and memories. The messages began before 8. Andrew, the mortgage payment bounced again. They're threatening a late fee. We need to talk. Claire, the school called. Michael's tuition payment didn't go through. They want to schedule a meeting. This is humiliating, Helen. Humiliation again. They clung to that word like it was a wound someone else inflicted, never considering how many nights mine had gone unnoticed. I set the phone aside and watered the plants. The peace Lily had perked up overnight. Funny thing how even flowers respond when the house feels lighter. But by midday, the messages changed tone. It wasn't just inconvenience anymore. It was fear. Andrew, the insurance lapsed. I don't understand what's happening. The bank says your signature was removed. Mom, please, we can't sort this out without you. Claire, the credit card company, froze every account tied to your name. We're being treated like criminals. Criminals? No, just adults. Adults discovering the cost of comfort when comfort no longer comes free. Around 2 matter, there was a knock at my door. Not angry, this time. Not demanding, tentative, almost hopeful. I opened it to find Claire's sister Lisa standing on the porch coat, hastily thrown on hair pulled back with the kind of frustration only family emergencies create. Mrs. Grant. She began smoothing her jacket, though it didn't need smoothing. I'm sorry to bother you. Andrew asked me to check on you. Check on me as if I were the broken one. Is everything all right? I asked her calmly. She blinked, thrown off by my serenity. Well, no, not really. Claire is in tears. Andrew is furious, but also lost. They said every payment tied to you is stopped. I mean, everything. Yes, I said softly. That's correct. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She wasn't used to direct answers. Most people aren't. May I ask why? She said, her voice gentler than I expected. You may, I answered, but the explanation won't change anything. She studied me for a moment, really looked. Not the polite glancing over people do when they've already decided who you are. This was different. A woman recognizing another woman's boundary even if she didn't fully understand it. Well, she murmured, I hope they didn't hurt you. Claire, she can be thoughtless. And Andrew, he thinks he's doing the right thing even when he's not. I know, I said, but knowing doesn't erase what's been done. Lisa nodded slowly, then stepped back. If you need anything, Mrs. Grant, call me. Truly, that surprised me. Kindness from an unexpected corner often does. After she left, I returned to the living room and sat down with a blanket across my knees. I wasn't cold. I just liked the weight of it. Weight can be reassuring when life suddenly feels too light. An hour later, another message from Andrew. Mom, the bank said we're responsible for all outstanding balances now. I don't know how you expect us to manage this. There it was. Not worry, not apology. Expectation. Expectation that I would swoop in, steady the ship, fix the chaos they created by leaning on me for too many years. He wrote again, more frantic this time. I can't afford the house without your help. Why would you do this? Just tell me what you want. We can work something out. What I wanted. Such a simple phrase. And yet no one had asked me that in decades. Not truly. I looked around my living room at the photographs, the quiet furniture, the sunlight creeping across the carpet. What I wanted was very small and very simple. A life where I wasn't carrying people who refused to walk. Evening settled slowly, a soft blue turning to gray. Outside, a car door slammed sharp, frustrated. I didn't get up to see who it was. The world had grown too used to me responding every time it demanded something. Instead, I brewed a fresh pot of tea, letting the scent of chamomile fill the air. I had always been the safety net beneath their lives. Now they were learning how high they'd been living without ever looking down. And in that quiet, I finally felt what freedom tasted like. Not sweetness, not triumph, just the gentle relief of finally putting something heavy down. I had just finished washing the dinner dishes when I heard the car pull up outside. Too fast, too close. The kind of stop a person makes when patience has run out. A moment later, footsteps pounded up the walkway. Heavy, urgent, unmistakably Andrew's. He didn't knock at first. He tried the handle, found it locked, then knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. Mom opened the door. His voice carried that sharp edge he used when the children misbehaved. Except I wasn't a child, and this wasn't misbehavior. I dried my hands slowly, letting the towel absorb the last bit of warmth. Then I walked to the door and opened it just wide enough to look at him. He stood there breathless, face-flushed eyes bright with frustration. For a moment, I saw a flash of the boy he once was, the one who ran home crying when he broke his arm, the one who crawled into my lap without asking. But the man standing on my porch now was armored by years of entitlement he no longer recognized as such. "Mom," he said, stepping forward as if expecting me to step back. I didn't. "What is going on?" "The bank won't talk to me. The mortgage bounced. Claire's furious. The kids are scared. And you," his voice cracked, "you're just sitting here acting like nothing's happening." I opened the door one more inch. Not an invitation, just space to breathe. "Something is happening," I said quietly. "You're finally standing on your own feet." He stared at me stunned. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I said that I've carried you for far too long." He shook his head, angry now. "This isn't carrying us. This is sabotaging us. You blindsided me. You could have talked to me before doing something so extreme." I let his accusation settle between us. Then I answered, "I've tried talking for years, Andrew. Not with speeches. Those aren't my way. But with questions you didn't hear, with boundaries you stepped over. With moments you should have noticed, but didn't." He blinked as if the words hit a part of him unprepared for impact. "I have never asked you for anything," he argued. "No," I said. "You expected instead. An expectation can be heavier than any request." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "So you're punishing us? Is that it?" Because of one bad dinner, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how small he made the truth sound. "It wasn't one dinner," I said. "It was a pattern. Years of being present but unseen. Years of paying for things no one thanked me for. Years of being spoken to only when something needed fixing." His shoulders dropped, not in understanding, but in exhaustion. "Well, what do you want me to do? Tell me how to fix this. You fix it," I said, "by living your life without assuming mine belongs to you." He stared at me a long, long time, and for the first time in years, he had nothing to say. The wind brushed past us, stirring a faint scent of pine from the yard. A dog barked down the street. Ordinary sounds, but they felt strangely louder with all the space between us. Finally, he stepped back from the door, confusion tightening his face into something almost vulnerable. I don't "I don't understand you anymore," he admitted. "I know," I said softly. "That's because you stopped looking." His eyes flickered as if the truth burned more than he expected. We stood there another moment, mother and son bound by love, separated by everything unspoken. Then he walked toward his car without another word, leaving only the sound of gravel shifting under his shoes. I closed the door gently, as if not to disturb the quiet that had finally returned. After Andrew drove off that evening, the house settled into one of those deep silences that feel almost like a held breath. Not frightening, not empty, just still. I stood by the closed door for a moment longer, my hand resting lightly on the wood, sensing the faint tremor of everything that had just shifted between us. When I finally walked back to the living room, my legs felt heavier than usual. Not from age, though age always adds its own weight, but from the quiet ache that comes when the truth has been spoken aloud after years of being swallowed. I sat down in my chair and let my body ease into it slowly. The cushions had molded to me over the years. They carried my shape the way memory carries the parts of us we can no longer name. Outside, a neighbor's porch, light flicked on, casting a soft yellow glow through my curtains. Evening had fully settled. I wasn't angry. Surprisingly, I wasn't even sad. What I felt was hollow, not painfully so, just the clean kind of hollow left after removing something that had no business being inside you in the first place. Relief, I suppose, shaped like absence. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time moves differently in a quiet house. Eventually, I rose and made myself tea. Not out of habit, but because the ritual soothed me. Boil water, warm cup, honey, or none. Hold 2 hands around the heat. Simple motions that reminded me I was still here, still whole, still capable of choosing gentleness for myself, even when the world offered none. But gentleness didn't stop the thoughts from returning one by one. I replayed Andrew's face, the anger fading into confusion, the confusion into something close to hurt. For a second, I wondered if I'd gone too far, spoken too bluntly. Yet every time that doubt crept in, another memory surfaced. The unpaid debts, the rushed dinners, the cold plates, the unspoken expectation that I would fill every gap in his life and ask for nothing in return. A mother can forgive many things, but she cannot survive by erasing herself. I took my tea to the window and sat on the edge of the couch. The street outside was quiet except for the distant hum of a car passing now and then. My reflection in the glass looked older than I felt inside. Not fragile, but weathered. A woman who had lived long enough to reach the edge of her own patience. The phone buzzed once on the coffee table. I didn't move to pick it up. I didn't need to see the name. I already knew it wasn't Michael. Instead, I thought of him. His earnest questions, his quiet way of offering care without expecting anything in return, the only one who had looked at me with something close to understanding. That small thought warmed me more than the tea, and then unexpectedly a heaviness reached me, a different kind of weight, not from doubt, not regret, loneliness, perhaps a thin, delicate strand of it. Because even when the decision is right, even when it belongs wholly to you, stepping away from the people who share your blood leaves a mark. I let myself feel it. I didn't push it away. Women my age spend too much of life pretending our wounds are lighter than they are. But even in that quiet ache, I sensed something steadier beneath it, a certainty, a boundary long overdue. When I finished my tea, I rinsed the cup, set it gently in the drying rack, and turned off the kitchen light. The house dimmed behind me room by room until only my bedroom lamp glowed softly. As I pulled back the covers, one last thought settled in my mind. Not sharp, not bitter, just true. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to let them diminish you. I lay down slowly, letting the quiet fold around me, feeling not broken, not triumphant, simply real for the first time in a very long while. The morning after Andrew's visit arrived softly with a pale light stretching across my bedroom floor. Like a careful hand smoothing out wrinkled fabric, I lay awake before rising, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling. Age makes even silence sound different, deeper, almost companionable. I welcomed it. When I finally sat up, my body protested the way it always does. But the ache felt less heavy today, as though the weight I'd been carrying for years had shifted somewhere outside of me. I moved slowly, pulling on a sweater, brushing my hair, opening the curtains one by one. These small rituals anchored me. Downstairs, the kettle hissed, quietly as it warmed. I watched it from the counter, my hand resting on the cool surface. I wasn't thinking of Andrew or Claire, or the chaos that surely continued churning through their morning. I thought instead of Thomas, of his steady, unsentimental love of his certainty, that dignity doesn't need to be loud to be real. He used to say, living with yourself should never feel like living with a stranger. I hadn't understood that fully until now. I carried my tea to the dining room table and opened the window just a crack. A crisp breeze drifted in, carrying the subtle scent of damp earth. The kind of morning that made me think of old walks along the river of simpler years when being needed felt like a choice, not an obligation. For a long while, I just sat there, hands around the warm cup, listening to the faint hum of traffic in the distance. There was no urgency inside me, no fear, just a steady awareness of myself, the kind that had been pushed aside for so long, it felt almost new. Later, I pulled an old photo box from the hallway closet. Dust rose as I opened it, soft as breath. Inside were pieces of a life lived quietly but fully. Thomas holding baby Andrew in the hospital room, birthday parties with melted candles, a picture of me standing beside our first car, one hand shielding my eyes from the sun, smiling, unburdened. I traced the edge of one picture with my finger. Time had softened everything, the corners, the colors, even the memory of the moment itself. But the woman in those pictures, she looked whole, not exhausted, not small. Somewhere along the years of giving, I had chipped pieces off myself without noticing how many were gone. I put the photos back gently and closed the box. I didn't want to linger in what was. Today wasn't about mourning the past. It was about seeing the path ahead, even if only the next small step of it. I went outside for a walk, something I hadn't done in months without hurrying. The neighborhood was quiet. A few joggers passed me nodding politely. A dog barked behind a fence. Life in all its ordinary rhythms moved on. I let myself breathe in the cool air, feeling the simple strength of putting one foot in front of the other. There's a dignity in moving at your own pace when the world expects you to rush. When I reached the park, I sat on a bench and watched a group of older women practicing Tai Chi on the lawn. Their movements were slow, controlled, deliberate, like a language spoken without sound. They didn't look fragile. They looked grounded, intentional. Women owning their space without explanation. I wondered when I had last allowed myself to inhabit my own life with that kind of clarity. Eventually, I walked back home with the sun warming my back. The house welcomed me with its quiet, but it no longer felt like a place I retreated into. Today, it felt like a place I lived in fully without shrinking myself to fit the expectations of others. I made lunch simple and small and sat at the table by the window. As I ate, I realized something with a calmness that surprised me. The distance growing between me and my family wasn't a punishment. It was a correction, a rebalancing of a life that had leaned too heavily in one direction for far too long. And for the first time in decades, the stillness inside me felt like peace, not loneliness. For 2 days after my quiet walk in the park, the house remained still. The phone rang less often now, though I suspected that was exhaustion rather than acceptance. Even panic has a limit. Eventually, people tire of shouting into unanswered spaces. I moved through my routine, softly watering plants, sorting mail, baking a small loaf of bread just because the scent reminded me of steadier years. On the third morning, as I finished slicing an apple, the phone buzzed with a familiar name. Thea, my daughter. She rarely called, not out of cruelty. She was simply one of those people whose life ran at a constant sprint, leaving little room for pauses. Yet her call startled me as if a door I hadn't touched in years suddenly opened. I answered, Mom. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, not rushed, not distracted, just tired. I heard about what's going on. Andrew called me yesterday. I waited. She wasn't a woman who liked silence, but she let it stretch this time as though she wasn't sure how to begin. He said you shut down the accounts, all of them, and that he tried to talk to you, but she hesitated. He said you wouldn't listen. I closed my eyes. I listened for years, Thea. Listening was never the problem. She let out a breath. Long, strained. I know she whispered. I've known for a while. That surprised me. You have yes. Her voice softened. Mom, I've watched him lean on you since Dad died. I watched Claire treat your generosity like a faucet she could turn on whenever she wanted. I didn't say anything because you never did. And you always looked so certain even when you weren't. There was a tremor of guilt in her tone, and it touched something inside me, something no anger ever had. Thea, I said quietly, you don't owe me an apology. Maybe not, she answered. But I owe you honesty. We stayed like that for several seconds, the silence now warmer, more thoughtful. You did the right thing, she said. Andrew won't admit it, not yet. But he needed this. Claire, too. They've been living off you for so long, they forgot they were supposed to live with you, not from you. It was strange hearing my own thoughts echoed back to me from the mouth of my daughter, who spent most of her life moving too quickly to see what stood still. Are they angry with you for calling me? I asked. She huffed a small laugh. Oh, definitely, but they'll survive their disappointment. They always have. Then after a moment, how are you feeling, truly? I thought about the quiet mornings, the eased shoulders, the way the air felt clearer in my lungs. Lighter, I said, like I finally put something down that I never should have carried. I'm glad, she whispered, and I felt the sincerity like a small candle lit between us. Before we hung up, she said, Mom, don't let them make you feel guilty. They're grown. It's time they lived like it. When the call ended, I stayed at the kitchen table for a while, letting the words settle inside me. Not because they shocked me, but because they affirmed something I'd only recently begun to believe, that not all distance within a family is failure. Sometimes it's healing disguised as silence. Later that afternoon, as if the universe weren't done with its small miracles, Michael sent a message. Michael, Dad's calmed down a bit. Mom, too. I think they're starting to realize they messed up. Just wanted you to know, I typed back. I appreciate that, sweetheart. Give them time. People often hear the truth long after it's spoken, he replied with another small heart. As evening spread across the living room, I sat in my usual chair and watched the light shift across the floor. Shadows lengthened, then softened. The world didn't feel harsh today. It didn't feel demanding. It simply was. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt that maybe, just maybe, my family was beginning to see the space I'd built for myself, not as a threat or a punishment, but as the boundary it always should have been. It was late afternoon when the knock came gentler than before, hesitant, almost apologetic. I wasn't expecting anyone, but something in the sound made me set down my book and rise slowly. My knees complained a little, but that was nothing new. At 72, your body speaks in small protests each time you stand. When I opened the door, Andrew was there. This time, he wasn't pacing or flushed with anger. He looked smaller somehow. Shoulders lowered, eyes dimmed with the exhaustion of a man who'd argued himself empty. He held his hands in his pockets the way he did as a boy when he feared he'd disappointed me. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside and nodded. He entered quietly as if afraid to disturb the air. I noticed he didn't head to the living room right away. Instead, he stood near the hallway looking at the photographs on the wall, ones he'd walked past thousands of times without ever really seeing. "You kept all these," he murmured. "I did." I said, "They're my life." He nodded slowly. Then after a long pause, he turned to me. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were small, unpolished, but they were real. I didn't understand how much we were leaning on you, how much I was. I watched him for a moment. His face was older than the boy I once held, younger than the man he pretended to be vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen for decades. "You didn't want to understand," I said gently. "There's a difference." He closed his eyes briefly as if the truth stung but didn't surprise him. "You're right," he admitted. "I got used to things being easy. Too easy. Every time something went wrong, I told myself I had it under control. But really, he hesitated. Really, I knew you'd fix it. And you never asked what it cost me," I said, not accusingly, simply stating a fact. "No," he whispered. "I didn't." A silence settled between us, soft but thick like dust on an untouched shelf. "I was angry at first," he said. "When the cards froze, when the bank called, when everything started falling apart, I felt betrayed." I nodded. Losing dependence often feels like betrayal. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah, maybe it does." Another pause, and then his voice cracked. Not from anger this time, but from something tender and worn. "But last night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, what kind of son am I if my own mother feels she has to pull away to protect herself?" I felt something tremble inside me. Not broken, not raw, just human. I walked to the armchair and sat down. He followed, taking the couch across from me, elbows on his knees like a man seeking steady ground. "I didn't pull away to punish you," I said. "I pulled away to save what little of myself I had left." He swallowed hard. "I understand that now, or I'm trying. The first honest effort he'd offered in years. I don't expect you to fix everything," he continued, "and I don't expect things to go back to how they were. His voice thinned. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I said softly. "But you will have to meet me differently than before." He nodded with a seriousness I hadn't seen since he was young and still learning how to be gentle. "What can I do?" he asked. The question hung between us. "Simple, unfamiliar. Start by seeing me," I said. "Not as a resource, not as a solution, just as your mother, a woman with limits and dignity." His eyes grew wet, though he blinked quickly, not letting the tears fall. "I can do that," he whispered. I didn't rush to comfort him. Some realizations belong to the person who makes them. Instead, I rested my hands in my lap and let a long breath leave my chest, one that had been sitting there for years. He stayed a little longer, talking quietly without demands or expectations. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Thank you for letting me come," he said. I nodded. "Thank you for coming as my son, not as someone asking for something." He managed a faint smile, then walked down the steps, shoulders not as heavy as when he arrived. When I closed the door behind him, the house felt neither empty nor crowded. It felt balanced, and that for the first time in decades, felt like enough. Dawn arrived softly, without ceremony, slipping through my curtains like a gentle hand brushing my cheek. I woke before the alarm, as I often do now, my body attuned to the quiet hours when the world has not yet decided what kind of day it intends to be. The house felt warm despite the morning chill, holding a kind of peace I had not felt in decades. I made my way to the kitchen, slowly touching the back of each chair as I passed a small habit, grounding and familiar. The kettle hummed its low song. Outside, the sky was a pale wash of blue touched with gold at the edges. I stood there, watching it for a long moment, letting myself breathe in the stillness. The phone sat on the table silent, no missed calls, no demands, no frantic explanations, not even apologies, just calm. I poured my tea and took it to the window, settling into the chair that had become my morning refuge. A thin layer of frost sparkled on the grass, turning the yard into something almost delicate. A bird hopped along the fence, fussing at a patch of seed I'd scattered yesterday. Simple life, honest life. I thought of Andrew, his tired eyes, the way his voice softened when he said he didn't want to lose me. A small step, perhaps, but a real one. Change at his age never comes in leaps. It arrives in inches and hesitations, in the quiet admission of what should have been seen long ago. I hoped he would keep walking in that direction, not for my sake, but for his own. I thought of Thea, her unexpected honesty over the phone, the quiet solidarity she offered without fanfare. A daughter who had grown into a woman capable of reflection, even if life had pulled her away from me more than I wished. And of course, I thought of Michael, my gentle boy, the one bright thread in all this unraveling. His kindness had been the truest mirror of the family I once believed we could be. For the first time since all this began, I realized that I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was something steadier, deeper, like the soft settling of dust after a storm. I survived the years of being invisible. I survived the expectation that my life existed to cushion theirs. And now, in this quiet kitchen at dawn, I had finally stepped back into my own skin. Not loudly, not bitterly, just fully. I sipped my tea and let the warmth bloom through my chest. Somewhere down the street, a car started a dog, barked a neighbor's door closed. Ordinary sounds. But today they felt like the beginning of something new. Thomas once told me long before the children were grown, dignity isn't something you fight for. It's something you stop giving away. I never understood that truth until now, but I understand it completely this morning. My life is mine again. Not borrowed, not divided, not spent in silence. Just mine. And for a woman my age, that is no small victory. If you've walked through similar quiet hurts, if you've carried more than anyone ever noticed, if you've been treated like an afterthought in the very family you built, let this be a gentle reminder. You are allowed to reclaim yourself. And if this story touched you, stay close. There are more stories waiting to be told, and I'd be honored to share them with you.